privileged to have with us today representatives from both the Obama and the McCain campaign to talk with us about the visions of space of their candidates and what we might be able to expect for the space program if they should be elected. Representing the Obama campaign is Lori Garver, who many people may know was the former executive director for many years of the National Space Society and is certainly known to people in the space community for her work there. And representing the McCain campaign is Walt Cunningham, who is a former astronaut, who, of course, many people know about as well. Moderating the debate will be Leonard David, a journalist. Leonard David was actually involved in the original Mars Underground, the first Case for Mars conference, which was held right here in 1981, and subsequent conferences in 84, 87. And he was the person who basically wrote the report of the National Commission on Space that was chaired by Thomas O. Paine, the former NASA administrator, that laid out a vision of human exploration and expansion into space that was truly a very inspiring thing. It was such a good government report that it was actually reprinted by Bantam as a commercial book, which is amazing because most of these things, you know, they usually destroy it before they leave the government printing office so as not to cause brain damage. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Would the people please come up and take their seats on the podium? I'll just mention the format. There's going to be initial statements from each of the two campaign representatives. Then Leonard David, as moderator, will ask each of them a series of questions to draw them out a bit. And then you will have a chance to ask the candidates questions. And I think it's fair for you to direct a question to one of the camps, but then have the other one have a chance to respond to the response. Okay, so with that, I'll leave it to Leonard David, who is the one with the beard and the bald head.
Well, thanks, Robert, I think. Okay. My lot in life right now is I'm a correspondent for Space.com and Space News newspaper. I'm also a research associate with the Secure World Foundation here in the area. And another hat, and that's sort of why I don't have much hair, is as a writer for the Coalition for Space Exploration. All these groups are very keen on deciphering just what the true trajectory of America's space agenda should be. Not only that of NASA, but for national security purposes, as well as the ever-growing private sector in a wide-ranging number of space pursuits. Now, you know, when you're a writer or, you know, late at night and you're trying to get the story done, typically 3 o'clock in the morning for me, trying to finish this great masterpiece of writing, you always opt out for, if you're in trouble, I'm typically in trouble, you opt out for a last line that says, "Time will tell." Or you wind up titling the story, "America's Space Program at the Crossroads." Well, okay, 21st century, here we are, election coming. On this occasion, maybe those words do ring true. Just where is the U.S. space adventure really headed? I hope we can all walk away with a much better understanding of what the two presidential hopefuls envision for the vision of space and the general direction of space. So let me introduce, I'm going to get out of the way here and introduce our very special guest tonight. Our first presenter is Lori Garver, representing Senator Obama. She's the president of Capital Space, LLC, where she advises organizations and corporations on their aerospace interests. In addition, Ms. Garver serves as a senior advisor for space. How do I pronounce? That's what I forgot. I know I was supposed to ask you something.
Avasant.
Avasant Group, a strategic consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. She's been steeped in space matters for a number of years, a good friend of mine from being executive director slot at the National Space Society, then taking on a position as a NASA senior policy analyst for the Office of Policy and Plans. Her passion for space also includes a stab at gaining a sponsored space trip aboard the Russian Soyuz to the International Space Station. But that quest fell a little short, kept her groundbound for now. Her training in Russia was a powerful learning experience, giving her unique insights into space travel for all of us. So with that, let me invite Lori to have an opening statement.
Thank you so much, Leonard. It is great to be here, great to be in Colorado. I consider it one of my local territories because I went to college, not here, but down the road in Colorado Springs. And while typically August isn't when I would choose to come, given that I'm a big skier, I hear there's going to be snow in the mountains tonight. So maybe I should have brought my skis. It is wonderful to be here to talk about Senator Obama's space policy and what an Obama presidency would mean for our nation's space program. I guess I'd like to start by saying I don't really believe that space is a partisan issue. And I have a lot of respect for people who come into the space policy arena, and Walt and I have met more than 2 decades ago, as I have with Leonard. And I'm sure we'll find things to disagree about today, but I just want to reiterate that this isn't Republicans are good for space, Democrats are bad, or vice versa. I think we all benefit by having space be bipartisan. My little story on this is I've been on Crossfire actually twice, back when there was a Crossfire, and on both times they put me on the right. First time with Pat Buchanan, and the second time with Tucker Carlson. And the first time they sat me by Pat Buchanan, it was when Mars Observer had failed. And his opening is, "Mars Observer, phone home." And he's dramatic and arguing during the whole debate that we should continue the spaceflight program generally and human spaceflight specifically. On the other side was Michael Kinsley, who had Robert Park with him. You all know Robert Park is anti-human exploration primarily. Back in those days, the format was the guests left the program at the end, so the two commentators could argue about their various positions. And so we're in the green room for those last 2 minutes, and Pat Buchanan says to Michael Kinsley, "I can't believe you even support the space program. This is a Republican program." Michael Kinsley says, "What do you mean? This is a Democratic program. You Republicans don't even like spending on these kinds of things." He said, "Well, Kennedy sent us to the moon." And Pat Buchanan said, "Nixon was president when we landed on the moon." So I turned to Bob Park in the green room and said, "I think I won. They're arguing over who's more pro-space." So I think that is the goal, and hopefully that will be our argument tonight. In addition, I think we have some more current examples of this. The NASA bills in Congress have been broadly supported by both the Republicans and the Democrats. They've been trying to add money on the appropriations side, bills co-sponsored by Senator Mikulski and Senator Hutchinson trying to add money, as well as the authorization bills adding money. So this has all really helped the situation with regard to presidential candidates. I do think the presidential candidates' positions are critical, and it's one of the reasons I volunteer to do this in every 4 years, ever since the beginning of time, it seems. My first presidential campaign was John Glenn's in '83 and '84. So he, I would argue, didn't even have as complete of a space policy as we do now in this cycle. I believe we've heard a lot from the candidates, both in the primaries and now as leading up to the general on space policy. There are a number of reasons for this, but I'm going to give the Mars Society and Chris Carberry some of the credit. Having worked on space policy in this campaign for more than a year now, we have heard from Chris Carberry and the Mars Society people at town hall meetings across the country questions about space. I can't tell you how much this helps. Candidates come back. They need answers. issues people have to do research. Not only are you asking the questions, but you're helping with the issues people to get them ready to give more responsive answers. I really, from my National Space Society background, am a huge supporter in grassroots activities, really helping our space program. And I think this election, you guys can take a lot of credit. We can all really take a lot of credit for what's being said. So I'm going to let Senator Obama outline, first of all, what he said 2 weeks ago about space himself, since he is a much better speaker than I am. So Ryan, if you could roll the videotape, as they say. This was, I think the date is August 2nd.
You know, one of the areas where we're in danger of losing our competitive edge is in science and technology, and nothing symbolizes that more than our space program. You know, when I've written about this in my book. I grew up in Hawaii, and I still remember sitting on my grandfather's shoulders as some of the astronauts were brought in after their capsules had landed in the middle of the Pacific. And I could just barely see him. I was waving, I had an American flag. And I remember my grandfather explaining to me, this is what America's all about. We can do anything when we put our mind to it. We can do anything when we put our mind to it. And that was what the space program described, that sense of possibility and always, you know, reaching out to new frontiers. You know, when I was growing up,
who was it?
NASA inspired the world with achievements that we're still proud of. And today we have an administration that sets ambitious goals for NASA without giving NASA the support it needs to reach them. As a result, NASA's had to cut back on research, trim their program, which means that after the space shuttle shuts down in 2010, we're going to have to rely on Russian spacecrafts to keep us in orbit.
You got to love a town hall.
So let me be clear. We cannot cede our leadership in space. That's why I'm going to close the gap, ensure that our space program doesn't suffer when the shuttle goes out of service. We may extend an additional shuttle launch. We're going to work with Bill Nelson to add at least one more flight beyond 2010 by continuing to support NASA funding, by speeding the development of the shuttle successor, by making sure that all those who work in the space industry in Florida do not lose their jobs when the shuttle is retired, because we can't afford to lose their expertise. But more broadly, we need a real vision for the next stage of space exploration. And to help formulate this vision, I'm going to reestablish the National Aeronautics and Space Council so that we can develop a plan to explore the solar system, a plan that involves both human and robotic missions, and enlists both international partners and the private sector. And as America leads the world to long-term exploration of the moon and Mars and beyond, let's also tap NASA's ingenuity to build the airplanes of tomorrow and to study our own planet so we can combat global climate change. Under my watch, NASA will inspire the world once again and make America stronger, and it's going to help grow the economy right here in Brevard County and right here in Florida. That's what we're going to do.
Okay, well, I don't know how many of you had seen that, but you can imagine for me, I just can't listen to it often enough. It is a very gratifying to hear him say those words. We know that was in Brevard County. I think it's quite clear you're going to be hearing more from this candidate about his plans for NASA and the space program. Just to conclude before I turn it over for Walt's opening and then questions, The policy of Senator Obama was outlined on January 10th. They came out with a 2-page document that outlined an 8-point plan. It is currently being expanded upon and refined. There was a meeting on Tuesday, a town hall meeting with campaign staff, getting input on the space program for that policy. I'll be giving input based on things I hear tonight from all of you. But in short, I think the parts that you care about the most, human spaceflight in particular, Senator Obama has committed to consider at least an additional flight of the space shuttle to the space station, and he has committed to completing the International Space Station. He is committed to doing everything possible to eliminate the gap between when we're going to retire the shuttle and when we can launch humans to space ourselves. Obviously, this takes on new meaning this week with the problems in Russia. I'm sure we'll get into that in the Q&A. In addition, for exploration, he has committed, you heard it, talking about going beyond low Earth orbit, back to the moon and onto Mars. Robotic exploration continues to be an interest to Senator Obama, as well as monitoring the forces of climate change on the planet from space and investing in aeronautics research. All of this he intends to do with greater international partnerships and with greater partnerships with the private sector. And to coordinate these efforts, he's already announced the reformation of the National Aeronautics and Space Council. He has, in response to questions, specifically said he would increase NASA's budget to accomplish all of these goals. And let me leave you with a quote that didn't make it into the clip, which he said he left an absolute commitment that we will have a space program that is second to none. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Lori. Our other special guest representing the McCain campaign and his own views about where space exploration should be going, Walter Cunningham. He has enjoyed multiple careers in the military, civilian, government service, as well as the private industry. His own space crusade, which I was really interested to learn in his bio, included a doctoral program that was based on an experiment with the Earth's magnetosphere. That's big here in Boulder, space science. Magnetospheres go well here. An investigation that flew on the first orbiting geophysical observatory, OGO. I remember OGO going. However, for we space enthusiasts, we know Walt is a milestone maker in human space exploration. Selected as an astronaut in 1963, his first flight assignment was to the backup crew for Apollo 1. And following the Apollo 1 disaster, Walt flew the first human-carrying flight of the Apollo program in 1968 as the pilot of Apollo 7, a mission that helped put America back on track for human landings on the moon. He's an excellent writer. I'm jealous of some of his articles already. He's an author of a book. He's ahead of me by a good margin. The book is called The All-American Boys. And he currently writes a viewpoint column for the popular Launch magazine, which I'm sure some of you here have already even told me that I should be reading. So with that, let's invite Walt up to the stage.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you very much. I'm fighting going hoarse, so I hope that... Can you hear me in the back? Okay. You could have just introduced me as an ancient astronaut. My wife says I'm reminding her more and more of an old television set. The instant on is off, color's fading, it's taking longer to warm up, and vertical hold isn't what it used to be. I deny it, of course. But we're here to discuss which candidate offers the best prospects for a robust space policy. It's not about manned versus unmanned, military versus civilian, government versus private sector. It is overall space policy. I thought I already knew the answer, but when I was asked last weekend if I would do this, I did a little research and it just confirmed my opinion. And I must say, most of you know too, the very name Mars Society implies, or I should say, requires a robust space policy. To you, each and every one of you in this room, space is important. It may not determine your vote due to other issues, but in your heart, you already know which candidate offers the best prospects for a healthy space program. Pronouncements by candidates on space issues are few and far between. It's not likely to be a significant campaign issue unless this recent invasion of Georgia by Russia brings it to the front of our consideration this year. Why should space policy be important? Why should we want to remain the leading spacefaring nation of the world? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I'll just mention a couple of them here. Economy. It's a peaceful engine of change that's usually found only in war. Each dollar spent at NASA has a very high multiplier in the economy. We get a very high return on the investment. The 30-year expansion of our economy that went on between the 1960s and 1970s can trace a whole lot of that. We can trace it back to the $25 billion investment we made in the Apollo program in the 1960s. We need further investments to guarantee the same thing 30 years hence. Technological innovations. Attempting what is thought impossible, we will always encounter obstacles. Overcoming those obstacles requires innovative technology that feeds our industry and our economy. Space exploration feeds the human spirit, creates national pride in U.S. power and capability. National security. Space pervades everything these days. Freedom of action in space is as important to the United States as air power and sea power. And of course, it advances human knowledge, which is one of what I consider one of the most important obligations our generation has for the next generation. All of these and more are self-evident to all the other nations of the world. We are the only country that I know of that spends every so often having an agonizing reappraisal about our space program. And I guess I should also mention, the NASA priorities: to complete the International Space Station, to get Constellation flying, and of course, to shorten the gap between Shuttle and Orion if possible. You see, we've always had the technology and the resources, but it also takes something else. It takes national will. And that requires a true commitment in order to generate the funding. A national commitment is correlated with the amount of funding it gets. Since the glory days of Apollo, space exploration has been progressively starved. Today, the funding for NASA is less than 1/5 of what it was in 1965. And it's less than 0.6% of the federal budget. And that brings us to tonight's discussion. And anything I say here tonight, I invite any one of you to independently confirm whatever I say. As of today, there's not all that much difference in what the candidates are saying about space. That just tells me that we have to look at other discriminators, of which there are many. And you can get these words off of the various candidates' internet sites. That's where I had to go to get them. John McCain has always been a strong supporter of NASA and the space program. I would expect no less from a fellow naval aviator. He sponsored legislation authorizing funding consistent with the vision for space exploration. which includes, of course, a return of astronauts to the moon and a preparation for a manned mission to Mars. He believes in a continued He believes in continued U.S. support. He believes it's a major importance to America's future innovation and security. John McCain believes curiosity and a drive to explore have always been a quintessential American trait, and this has been most evident in the space program, for which he will continue his strong support. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, Senator McCain played a major role in legislation to provide funding for space exploration, both manned and unmanned, space science, earth sciences, aeronautics research. And he's also sponsored legislation to support the commercial space industry. Senator McCain has spearheaded efforts to control costs at NASA and promote a space exploration agenda based on sound management, safe practices, and fiscal responsibility. I'll summarize it with saying, as President, John McCain will ensure that space exploration is a top priority and that the U.S. remains a leader. Commit to funding the NASA Constellation program to ensure it has the resources to begin a new era of human space exploration. Review and explore all options to ensure U.S. access to space by minimizing the gap between the termination of the space shuttle and the availability of Orion. Ensure the national workforce is maintained and fully utilized. Complete construction of the ISS, International Space Station. Seek to maximize the research capability and commercialization possibilities of the ISS. Maintain infrastructure investments in Earth monitoring satellites and support systems. Seek to maintain the nation's space infrastructure. And last, and certainly not the least important, prevent wasteful earmarks from diverting precious resources from critical scientific research and ensure that adequate investments are made in aeronautics research. Well, back to Barack Obama. Good news, probably due to your presence, Laurie. As of the 1st of this month, Barack Obama became a born-again believer in Orion and Aries. Sort of. And he did it right there in Titusville, Florida. I just saw it. He said he no longer favors slashing NASA's budget, but he would not commit to the vision for space exploration, and certainly is not spending any time dreaming about going to Mars. Here's what he said, quote, "Here's what I'm committing to. Continue the Constellation. We're going to close the gap between the end of shuttle flights and Constellation." And he said he would work with Senator Nelson for, quote, "at least one additional shuttle flight beyond 2010. I'm sure that's a token to Bill. But he would not commit to a $2 billion increase to NASA's budget. Hello, Barack. You don't do these things without an increase to NASA's budget. Until this first weekend in August, Barack Obama was widely regarded as anti-space. His November 2007 education policy included a paragraph saying he would pay for part of the $18 billion per year initiative by delaying the Constellation program for 5 years, according to the document. Does he not understand that you can spend all the money in the world on education, but unless you can do something to inspire the students to learn, that it's not going to go very far? I almost thought he should have maybe cut down that initiative and put some of that money over to close the gap and inspire the students between 2010 and 2015. Obama has shown himself to be singularly uninterested in the nuts and bolts of policy. For example, he's done little in terms of hearings during his 1 full year in the Senate, while he has been a subcommittee chairman. Personally, I believe that he will follow political expediency in the early years of any Obama administration. John McCain is singularly interested in the nuts and bolts of policy and demonstrates he has firm views on policy issues. I do expect a President McCain will take interest, as he has done as a senator, by challenging programs in pork, and he will support the vision for space exploration. But he will also hold NASA's feet to the fire on program costs. We must take into consideration the totality of Obama's legislative record, together with the totality of his campaign promises. It is virtually impossible to predict what Obama would actually do as president on any specific policy issue. And he has been vague enough that he can claim he is fulfilling a campaign promise no matter what action he actually takes. I maintain Obama has no real commitment to space. Initially, his campaign looked at space as a potential source of funding for other things like education. And early in the campaign, he identified NASA as wasteful spending during a time of economic hardship. Mr. Obama is committed to nearer-term goals, like getting elected. He will say anything it takes to get elected. So just wait. He will say more about the space program. It's just words. What NASA represents to Obama are Florida votes, where even a few hundred votes might swing the state in his favor. Afterward, it won't matter to Obama, and neither will NASA. Obama does have a record, and it's a record of doing and saying anything necessary to get elected, even if that means promising Florida and the space advocate community, that's you and I, the moon, because it will be easy enough to stiff us later. Is he a Johnny-come-lately? Yes. Is he a true believer? No. And you can do your own research on this, looking at records and what have you. It's kind of interesting. Just before I came over here, I was watching the news, and they had a program where all the CNN talking heads were on in one big group, and I just got in the tail end of it, where one of them was answering about the candidates' opinion and what they were saying about the Russian incursion in Georgia. And one of them said, quote, "I think they ended up saying the same thing. They are both disgusted and angry," unquote. Now that is 1 week after Obama said, when he was asked initially, quote, "That does not comport with the Olympic ideal." Well, Mr. Obama, welcome to the real world. We do know this. John McCain was sponsoring space legislation when Obama was still organizing neighborhoods. Thank you.
Well, my little task is to try to draw some people out, I guess. Okay, well, let's see. What would be a good way to start? I think one of the worrisome things for me, I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 30 years, watched NASA, lived on Capitol Hill. I went to a lot of hearings, and my view there is it's crazy to call them hearings when nobody listens, you know. And I suffered through decades of that. And one of the things I left D.C. with was we're after $2 billion for NASA. I left Washington, D.C. wondering if NASA was spending its own money wisely, you know, whether there was inefficiencies in the NASA system. And they couldn't find billions of dollars for the space station program at one time. I don't think they ever did. And so I guess, you know, here we are, October of this year is 50 years of NASA. Now, some pundits, and maybe I'm one of them on certain days, the graying of NASA. Others see the agency lost in space. I guess maybe for Lori first, maybe in your view, just how healthy is NASA? Even given resources, even given some vision, even given presidential attention. What today, in your mind, are the strengths of NASA and the weaknesses?
Well, Leonard, I will be happy to answer that question, but I first cannot let that opening statement go without a rebuttal.
I knew I had that right here.
When I got here and Walt asked, "Oh, have you ever done this before?" This is my first one of these. I'm like, "Oh, I do this all the time." It's like, that's not what we usually do, Walt. But you know, some of us have done our research, and I can get there. I am there right now, as a matter of fact, and I can tell you that the bills that John McCain was sponsoring when Barack Obama was doing grassroots organizing included in 1991 when he put a bill forward to cancel the International Space Station. John McCain has said he will freeze discretionary funding, and that includes NASA, folks. When you say get real, I would suggest you talk to your very own candidate, because Barack Obama is the only candidate who said he would increase NASA's budget. Senator McCain has not, in fact, said that, and I agree with you that we do need to get real, and ultimately that is what it comes down to. John McCain has been very, very hard on the aerospace industry, on the aerospace companies. If you search under McCain and aerospace, almost everything you get are press releases about procurement problems. We have appeared on his watch list for pork programs time and time and time again. He has a general disregard for our industry, folks. So let's not suggest that there is someone in John McCain who idealizes what it is we do as a community. I would also just close, before I answer your question, Leonard,
Never mind the question.
by saying that specifically this year, McCain, on the floor in the Senate, had this to say about NASA when our bill was coming forward with the extra $1 billion that was co-sponsored by Senators Mikulski and Hutchinson. Quote, "Since this bill has been brought to the floor, over $1 billion worth of spending has been added. Specifically, the Senate voted to add $1 billion on top of the $10 billion. That's what I guess he assumed NASA's budget was, so wait till he hears it's really more like 18. Than the bill already provided to NASA. I continue to support NASA and space research, but at what cost to our nation's children who will inherit the largest national debt this country has seen?" I would encourage you to go to the record. Thank you.
Okay, well, maybe I should give Walt a chance to. But let me ask, I think one of the points he brought up that you didn't talk about, it was this religion of finding space, because our first introduction to Obama was, you know, education first, something about, you know, cutting the budgets and putting it in, and all of a sudden he's in Florida, basically talking to a group of people that are hungry for work, and it all comes down to how do you put 17,000 people working on the shuttle program into a 6-person capsule?
There is...
Right?
There's no question that Senator Obama does not have this 20-year voting record that you can look to. He has supported the NASA bills on all the votes that have come up, and he has not chaired committees for it, as has Senator McCain during the exact time that the current plan was put in place that McCain supported, which is causing this 5-year gap in retirement of the space shuttle. What I can tell you personally about Senator Obama, I have spoken with him a couple of times about the space program. I spoke to him more than a year ago before, you know, you say he had this you know, epiphany, but Senator Senator Obama has supported space program back when I talked to him a year ago, May. He did feel that we were not within NASA connecting with the American public as we should. He is very interested in supporting NASA and giving it more money for those goals that will inspire the country, recognizing the public. We are taxpayers. We're the ones who pay for this program, and he wanted to hear from the public. This is a very reasonable thing in my view. Now, of course, he came out with an education policy that had, with a 14-page policy, the last section included paying for some of it with NASA, and he absolutely has reversed that position. I, for one, respect a politician who is willing to learn and doesn't have their feet in cement. He heard from a lot of people, including educators, on why the space program is important. And I'm sorry, if you want to talk about people changing their minds, this is from Senator McCain, who's changed his mind on tax cuts for the wealthy, torture, campaign finance reform, ethanol, Confederate flag, and Roe versus Wade.
Okay, well, why don't you forget my question. Let's move into... I'll write something about that.
I've got no dog in this hunt, except to say that if you respect a politician for changing his position, then you must have a lot of respect for him. So,
well, you've ridden the beast going into space. I mean, and watched NASA from the inside. Maybe let's try to get back to a little bit of the question about if you were administrator for a period of time. Do you see something in NASA after 50 years that has become desensitized to what its mission is or what the public expectation of NASA is? What's your view?
this life, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that the organization and the administrator reflect our society and changes in our society in the last 30 or 40 years. We've become a risk-averse society. NASA is, like any organization, it's entrepreneurial when it's young. It's now middle-aged and bureaucratic. I can't believe the number of people working on all kinds of different things and how many folks you go through to get to any place. I'm not sure if anything can be done about that. But NASA, if it was me, I would be trying to lead our society out of the morass of agreeing that we can't take any risks and we can't do these things. That's why, as you know, I'm one of those people that says, "Hey, I'll go to Mars. We don't need to go to the moon." And if we got to that kind of an attitude, we would then solve those problems and we would get on with it as well, because I believe we have the capability of doing that.
Okay, Laura, you've been inside NASA plans and policies and policies and plans and the plans and policies. What you're out your message from you leaving the agency, what did you learn inside there about its strength and its what weaknesses you thought you saw?
I've actually always been more optimistic about NASA, even having been there and since I've left. To me, NASA is filled with people who are there because they want to have a better future for the world, their children. They are technically at the top of society. We all look to them with awe. I mean, it was great just to even tell people at a party, I work at NASA. I mean, it's just a wonderful place to be. Those of us who, in the community, follow every twist and turn sometimes get jaded. But ultimately, if you look within our federal government, I mean, we would be on some trip visiting a NASA center and say, the folks working at HHS cannot be having this much fun. We're in wind tunnels at Ames and going down to Stennis where they're testing rocket engines and getting us off the planet. I really feel NASA is not an untapped resource, but it is a resource that really is requiring more leadership. And Barack Obama is ready to provide that leadership. His greatest criticism of the existing program is that it hasn't been supported with enough funding by the existing president, and that we have this gap. So I think the respect for the people of NASA, especially when we at headquarters would get out to the centers, is something I've just never forgotten.
Okay. You both brought this up, and it's intriguing because there's lots of columns today and yesterday, and that is the gap and all these kind of things, but the dependence on the Russians and striving for international cooperation. We've got this $100 billion international space station. It's pretty much an engineering work of art and diplomacy as well as engineering. Where are we on this whole issue of Russia's incursion, and how are we supposed to, because it looks to me like some diplomatic fuse has been lit here that has some hissing going on that definitely could have some outer space policy impact. I mean, what's your view, Walt?
Well, there is no good ending to that kind of a circumstance. Let me make Laurie feel a little bit better by agreeing that we have not had great leadership at NASA for a long time. actually, what we have now is probably the best we've had in a long time, but that's all a relative kind of statement, because it became quite political back, well, before Sean O'Keefe and then Dan Golden. I mean, he was a survivor. So one of the problems that we've had at NASA is not having really good leadership. And it takes a true believer, it takes somebody that's really qualified. I think we've been putting people at NASA, with the exception of Mike Griffin, who does have the background and qualifications to appreciate it. We've been putting people there that didn't have the right background for it. Coming up to closing the gap, I'm one of those that believes that the International Space Station is a wonderful, wonderful creation, technological marvel of, not just our lifetime, in history. I also, though, believe very strongly that the Space Shuttle Orbiter should continue flying, that the Shuttle Orbiter is the safest American launch vehicle we've ever had. It's probably 8 or 10 times safer than we had back in the days of Apollo. They've had a couple of failures, and there's always going to be failures, and people are always going to get killed going into space. And in order to close this gap, which was created by a commitment to quit flying the shuttle, which is what's triggered this gap. And in fact, I think since Mike Griffin came in there, about the time he came in, they were still expecting like 29 or 30 flights. And I think they ended up flying 18 or 19 or something like that, and having to fight like hell to get a Hubble servicing mission. It's going to cost a couple of $2 billion a year to extend the life of the shuttle, if you can do it still, because they're already starting to convert pads and things like that. And part of the problem is when it comes to funding. This country, and especially Congress, does not face up to what it really costs to fly in space. They play a little game between each other. NASA gives a low number, and Congress keeps pushing until they can get a low number that they can approve, with both sides knowing full well that those numbers are never going to be adequate. And so what we end up doing, trying to fund the Vision for Space Exploration, for example, by trying to take the money out of a shuttle program, I personally think that the shuttle program was headed for closing down before they even said that. The other possibility, of course, is moving up the Orion. That's getting to be a much stickier wicket. In fact, that may not be possible. I used to argue, when I was writing, I'd argue to try to cut that, make it 2 years earlier, maybe at the cost of another $2 to $4 billion, but you had to close it up from both ends. We've gone through gaps in the past, but we've never gone through one where we knowingly relegated the future of our space program, which right now is really the International Space Station, to the whims of another country. And I have to tell you, I do believe that Senator McCain is one of the few people out there in Congress and the Senate today who have their eyes open and know what we're truly dealing with in this international situation.
And Laurie, I mean, Obama has made some really clear statements about international cooperation and opening up space for other nations. His view on Russia and even open airlock policy for China. Where do you see his interest in space in international participation and some of these other thorny issues?
Well, first, Leonard, in answer to your initial question on the situation and what it might mean for a station, NASA just put out a release, which I got on my BlackBerry and was reading right before I came up, saying that they had not received any indication that this was going to affect our relationship. Obviously, we have Russians and Americans on the space station right now. What it primarily has led to the concern in the community is that we're trying to extend this legislation to get the ability to buy Soyuz from the Russians during this gap period. And the legislation needs to be passed this September in order to have the 3-year advanced order time we need for Soyuz.
Say the name of that legislation.
INCSNA.
Yeah, which stands for, you remember?
Iran and North Korea, that's how we got the K back in non-proliferation agreement.
Okay.
So what is happening now, obviously, with Russia is probably going to make it highly unlikely that that legislation will pass in September. So I think the fact that we could have our International Space Station up there without the ability to have any Americans on board is something that is not only frightening, but really disturbing. And given that the situation has been set up in this administration, I think Senator Obama has been very clear that he would not put our space program at stake like this, but he does see international cooperation on space as a very valuable tool. It's one of those things that has been led by scientists in the early days of the program. Our very first scientific experiments were cooperative. We were able to coordinate internationally, even Apollo-Soyuz during the Cold War. So I think as a soft power tool, this is something the space program has offered in the past and would be looked to in the future, as well as a way to get more science and extend the risk and dollar that we would have to pay for missions. We do a lot of cooperative agreements where we provide one part of it and another country provides the other. As for China, I don't think we've had a specific proposal. We recognize that China is interested in human space flight. Clearly there will be moves to address how we'll be working with them in the next administration, and I think as Senator Obama has addressed his other opportunities, he sees this as a diplomatic issue. He's talked about it, and I think space would continue to be an international outreach tool.
Are you saying that we should use participation in the ISS as kind of a carrot to other countries?
Well, obviously that's what happened with Russia. In fact, the first President Bush with Shuttle Mir has started that, and the Clinton administration continued it, and it was only really in the Bush administration then it was put in the critical path because we were developing an X-38 that would have been an crew escape vehicle, which was canceled by NASA and the Bush administration.
Correction.
So we wouldn't have had it in critical path.
Correction. The Russians participated in the International Space Station, came about a year and a half or 2 years into the Clinton administration, and it happened after NASA had been asked to evaluate the Russian Mir space station, and the conclusion was it was aging, it was unsafe, and we shouldn't under any circumstances participate. But because it offered an opportunity for President Clinton to have a foreign policy initiative that they thought would be well received, they went ahead and signed the agreement on the International Space Station. Phase one of it was the Shuttle Mir, and anybody that's familiar with my readings knows that my opinion is that it was the most dangerous time ever for American astronauts is when we were going up regularly to the Shuttle Mir. Not to mention the fact, because we're on the subject of kind of international cooperation. Not many people in this generation, at least, are aware that back during Apollo, we had international cooperation. There were 106 different countries that participated in the Apollo program in one way or another, but they were not in key positions that could do something to stop us. And when we went into an international agreement with the International Space Station, you may recall, it was done on the basis that we were going to be 2 years quicker in finishing it, that it was going to save us $2 billion, and that we would keep all those Russian scientists from going to work in Iran, other places, dangerous places around the world. It's a long story to go into all of that, but what I'm saying is international programs may be good under some circumstances. International partnerships are not necessarily that good. And you can be sure that any time you make it an international program, that the whole program overall is going to cost a lot more than the program would have cost had you done it yourself. Now, there are times when maybe you feel that's justified, but don't fool ourselves and think that we're saving money, because it turns out that the International Space Station was 2 years later than the schedule, not 2 years earlier, And it cost $2 billion more than we had expected. So that's all I have to say on it.
Okay.
But keep in mind, if we didn't have the Russians on the space station and we lost the shuttle as we did, we would have been stranded.
Well, keep in mind also that if we had not adopted an attitude that said risk was not something we were supposed to expose to anymore, we would have continued to fly that space shuttle. There's not a doubt in my mind that we would have. And I, for one, am glad. I've enjoyed all the Russians that I know, and I've known a number of them. I was over there last year, and I've been to their launches. They have an entirely different approach, and it works for them. It does not necessarily integrate well in what we think about these things. But yes, I'm glad that we had them there when we refused to fly the shuttle after the Columbia disaster.
Okay, let me switch gears to the private sector, and both of you, I think, mentioned this as well. You know, we've got, it seems to me, in my little view of, you know, we've got two private space vendors, Orbital Sciences and SpaceX, and we seem to be also in a mode of trust but verify, kind of a Reagan term. We're not sure how this COTS thing is really going to play out. It's a saga yet to unfold. How do you feel, maybe Lori, in an Obama administration, how will the private space initiatives be treated? What incentives, what capabilities do you think the President Obama would offer there in that particular context?
Senator Obama has a really detailed technology and innovation policy. We've talked at length about space and the private sector. I think the COTS model is one he would support. I think there is absolute interest in continuing things like prizes. There is a role for the private sector as the return on investment for our economy is better for those private dollars than the government dollars. And in general, those are the kind of policies that he would strongly support.
Walt?
Well, I like to encourage private sector participation. And I think there are probably some things to come out of it. But so far, almost all of them have been strongly dependent on the government feeding the money to make it viable. The economy just doesn't support that. I was a venture capitalist for 12 years. I've done 25 startups, technology companies. And I can tell you, if there's a really good idea, the money will be there and there'll be a big return on it. Right now, it's very much like synthetic fuels and alternate energy and things like that. If the government doesn't put a lot of money behind it, it's tough to make it a go. So I don't expect a whole lot to come to NASA out of COTS. I think some technology may come out of it, but I don't think that they have yet come to face what NASA went through in its growing history. There's a reason why NASA was a government program in the beginning. And I happen to be a small government guy, but I've come over the years to realize that some things can only be afforded to be done by government, and a national space program is certainly one of those.
Last thing, and maybe we can make it short so we can open this up to the audience here with their questions, but okay, we've heard a bunch of things here. Interesting. I enjoyed this. Can you, in listening to each other, can you identify what policies in space do you feel are different from each of these candidates? And maybe more than that, what's different than the current administration? I mean, you both started sort of saying you've got visions about space, and some of them seem pretty compatible, but are there some specific things that you, Lori, see in McCain's space policy that is counter to Obama's view?
Well, as Walt said, a lot of what's been written has been very similar. I see a couple of key differences. Interestingly, one is that Senator Obama is the only candidate who has specifically committed to increasing NASA's budget and to flying at least an additional shuttle flight. While I think Walt has said he personally wants to fly additional shuttle flights, I don't believe that is the position of his candidate. In addition, Senator Obama has committed to restarting the National Aeronautics and Space Council, something I think the community recognizes. Space is so broad. We've talked about some of the key challenges for space now that need to be looked at a higher level in the White House than just NASA. Those are cross-cutting issues, including commercial, defense, international relations, and civil space. Finally, I guess my view is that Senator Obama really is the kind of person who can provide the leadership that is different than what we have now. We would not be in a similar circumstance to what I think even I've heard Mike Griffin say is a terrible situation now, where we are contingent on flying with the Russians in order to even get to our own International Space Station.
Well,
it's interesting Mike Griffin says that now, because Mike Griffin, over a year before he became administrator, led a study which wanted to cut the space shuttle back to as many as a dozen launches. So I think his arm's been twisted just to fly as many as he does. So I'm not sure where the credibility comes in there, Laurie, but I think it's a matter of credibility. And if I hear Obama say that he's not going to commit to a vision for space exploration, but he's going to buy one more launch if possible. Incidentally, one more launch isn't going to do diddly for either the workers or the space program in Florida, but it might buy a few voters from those people that are down there. And I also will be very surprised, unless we get a whole new initiative, whether we can do anything about this gap, because we keep screwing ourselves tighter and tighter into this particular trap. And when I hear an Obama say he's going to increase the NASA budget, when up until 2 weeks ago he was going to take $5 billion out of it and delay the Orion by another 5 years, yeah, it boggles my mind. Also, when I look at all the other things that he has a commitment to, not just a commitment to, but things that I think he truly believes in, that are going to amount to expenditures of, it depends on how big a numbers you want to believe in, but hundreds of billions of dollars. I seriously doubt if he's going to end up doing anything different with the NASA budget. In fact, I think we'll be lucky if the NASA budget holds its same proportion in the federal budget.
okay. Let's, anybody have any questions? I'm sure there's microphones here. And I've been warned that if you start rambling and like you've re-entered one too many times, you will be cut off. Yeah, try to make your questions real succinct, maybe better than mine, so go.
Okay. It's been recently revealed that NASA plans to destroy the tooling used to make the shuttle external tanks by as early as next month. Starting the destruction of $12 billion of infrastructure for the shuttle launch system. Not only would this prevent future shuttle missions, but more importantly, it would kill the possibility of a direct shuttle-derived heavy launch alternative proposed by many NASA engineers based on many previous studies, which they advance as a safer, simpler, and sooner solution than the Ares launch system. Since one of the candidates you represent will be the next president, will they be willing to stop this example of government waste and leave the option of a direct shuttle-derived heavy lift launch system to succeed the shuttle open to our nation?
Okay, there you go. In 25 words or less, we'll move to the next question. Walt, you got anything on that?
Well, I think it's a mistake to destroy tooling, just like I think it's a mistake to ground the space shuttle until we have a replacement. That's me. I really don't know what John McCain thinks about that issue. But I am also familiar with the argument that's going on about shuttle-derived other vehicles and all these other systems. And I'm also a strong believer that we should be evolving our hardware and not throwing it away. We threw away Apollo hardware, and we have the space shuttle, which I think is wonderful, and now we're going to throw it away and go back to Apollo on steroids. I think those are big mistakes as well. But I would caution you, because I'm familiar with the Direct and these other programs that are proposed. I look at them. NASA has looked at them thoroughly, and I've had feedback from NASA on it. And yes, both sides have their arguments they'd like to make. But if they started out today, they would end up having a lot of problems like NASA's encountered with Ares and Orion coming downstream as well. So I don't hold out a lot of hope, but I do see the possibility, a strong possibility of whoever's president probably considering those things, slowing down whatever we're doing, and basically ending up enlarging this gap, which is going, to me, is untenable.
And Laurie, the complexity of this question gets to something that Obama has gotten into, which is this the reactivation of a space council. That seems like those kind of decisions may well fit into that kind of operation to come up with some sensible direction.
Yeah, my view is if we had a space council now, and this kind of thing wouldn't be happening. I mean, there is just something wrong with an outgoing administration just deciding to burn the ships. It is not something I think you can really address to the candidates. If they're going to do it in a month, they're not going to be president yet. This is something that needs to be addressed within the current system. Of course, they're both senators and can do something that way. But this is not a program that you're going to continue to see in an Obama administration. There is going to be a more thought-through approach, and an approach, I think, that takes in opinions from the public. Part of what he has said about the Space Council is that it will provide a broader base for policymaking.
Okay. What? You got anything? We had 2 months. Oh, there's 2 of them. Oh, my God. Okay. Sorry.
Hello, this question's for Lori. I'm from Texas, and prior to the Texas Democratic primary, and then a few months ago, and then just before this meeting, I checked Obama's website. And just before the Texas primary and a couple of months ago, there was language in it that matched the soaring rhetoric we saw there of pulling Constellation to the left, and it's unconscionable that we're relying on the Russians. But under the education section, down under fiscal responsibility, it specifically didn't talk about cutting NASA. It talked about specifically delaying the Constellation program, completely contradicting what else was in there. Now, I checked the language a couple hours ago, and all that language is, from both sections, is gone. And so I'm just wondering, when did he decide that he wanted to move it to the left, and when did he decide to move it to the right? And how can we believe that this isn't just a born-again feeling until Florida votes for him?
I think it's very clear that Senator Obama and his staff early on did feel that the Constellation was a Bush program that didn't make a lot of sense. They were hearing from a lot of people, I think primarily space scientists, who didn't think the human program was as valuable as the scientific program, and that was put in their education policy. As they started hearing from more people within not only the space community, but they've told me the education community, they really thought it through, and they recognized the importance of space. I really don't have a problem, and again, I mean, we have candidates who have literally, Senator McCain has changed his mind on very, very critical issues, the list of which I read before. Candidates are allowed to evolve their positions. This one, he's been very clear about. He's heard from people. He recognizes that Constellation really is exploring with humans and robots beyond low Earth orbit. And we in the space community have known this for a long time, and we were great at sharing our views. As I said, I think all of you are to be congratulated as well. This is something he really believes. I've personally talked to him about it a number of times. It is not a stretch of imagination at all. It is not just something he is doing on the campaign. I think if you really look at votes for space, it's ultimately not going to be some huge block of voters. I think he recognizes this is something that is a leadership position that this country needs to take, and he truly believes in it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a quick statement and I'll ask my question. It was mentioned a couple times tonight about, well, the previous administration didn't support NASA and we will. let's face it, I think at least a lot of us would agree that no administration has really given total support and budget to NASA since the late 1960s. But either candidate that gets elected, it is likely that there will probably be a new NASA administrator in their, instead of Mike Griffin, in their administration. I'd like to ask each of you, if the candidate was to ask you who you would suggest as the next NASA administrator, what kind of names come to mind and why?
Walt, do you have any favorites? No?
No. A pox on both their houses.
All right, that'll be a good quote. Lori, what do you think?
Well, I like to talk about Neil Tyson. I think that someone who can really ignite excitement throughout the galaxy would be someone I would recommend. But in all honesty, in campaigns, people don't talk about those political appointment positions this early, specifically, so no one's asked me.
It takes a lot more to run an agency like NASA than just being quick on your feet, believe me. I happen to admire Neil Tyson too, but I'm not sure where he would fit there. NASA, whether we like it or not, and certainly in this room we've got a lot of complaints about what's been going on, it's probably one of the most successful government agencies in history. And that's in spite of all the things that we complain about.
I remember it was, I don't know what year this was, but it was between, who was before Golden? Who left, and we had a new...
Truly,
yeah, Richard Truly. And somebody said, all of a sudden there was this name floating in the hallway at NASA headquarters, when you actually, reporters were allowed to walk in the halls. And somebody said, there's this guy, that I swear he's going to get us, Dan Golden. We are going to work our butts off. This guy is going to be really strong. And, you know, he was in there for some 10 years. But I just remember almost a fear factor that, my God, we're really going to have to work. This guy's going to really drive us. Pretty interesting guy. Yeah, I'm sorry, here.
Let me inject something there. He was number 25 on that list.
Yeah.
I heard you talk about Russia and cooperation. I heard you talk about the American space program. But there's a big landmass between you and Russia. It's called Europe. And I'm a European, and I know we are going to Mars. Are you? And I'm talking official European policy. Space is a amendment in what we called the European Constitution. I think it's Article 12. It would be the first constitution on the planet to have a space amendment. So I'm not talking about dreams, I'm talking about reality.
I guess I would say that we are going to Mars, and we would love to do it together with you. I think that the U.S. policy is to go to Mars, and we've worked with Europe very closely on human and robotic spaceflight. We're on Mars now. Please join us.
Actually, I was asking you to join us.
Fine.
Walt, do you have any comment on that or not?
Well, I've always got an opinion. I may not be right, but I'm always positive. How many of you here saw the opening ceremony of the Olympics? Awesome, wasn't it? That was my first reaction. And right behind it, it was frightening. Not just everybody doing everything in sync and all of that. Because I tell you what, that showed. That was a very high-tech presentation. You will not see another one like it in your lifetime. It said, don't bother to tell us what to do. This is what we've done. It's our way of life. You may not like it, but this is what we've accomplished. So don't try to tell us what to do. It said, we'll do what we want to. And while they've been in space for a long time, they've had 2-man flights. They've said they're going to go to the moon, land man on the moon by 2024. Probably so. That'll be 50-some about 50 years after we did it, and the Chinese are not so foolish as to think that that is a win. It's my belief that right now you've got Chinese planning on going to Mars because they can think more long-term than we do. They can commit funds more long-term than we do. And what I got out of watching those opening ceremonies is that China is dead set on going to Mars because that's the final put down of those pesky Americans over there who went to the moon last generation.
May I comment on that? There was a Dutch space artist, I'm Dutch, who was contracted by the Chinese 5 years ago to make a big backdrop for their Mars exhibition. So I think they were really thinking of going to Mars.
Yeah, I only hope that we get it together again. Unfortunately, it's part of the American character that we always have to get knocked down before we get picked up. The Russians knocked us down in the 50s, and with Yuri Gagarin, and of course we responded like champions. But I had confidence in how we felt in those days. I'm hoping we can get some of that back.
Okay. Ron?
Now, I don't want to sound like a frustrated aerospace engineer, but I haven't heard anything that is getting me really excited here yet from either one of you guys, and I love you both, but I've heard a lot of this stuff before, and you know, I guess it amazes me that we've just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the birth of the space program, and we've learned a lot in 50 years in space. We've characterized the solar environment. We know what the moon's made of. We know what's out there. We've explored the solar system. We know that there's unlimited energy immediately above our heads. Don't you think it's time to put NASA to work for the American people and apply some of that knowledge? You know, first question, I guess.
You only get one.
You know, it would just seem that NASA needs to be refocused. You know, we're still, you know, developing chemical rockets that aren't getting us anywhere quick or cheaply. You know, and we see other people out there leading the way with advanced technology launch systems like, you know, laser beaming and space elevators. Where's NASA? You know, we had many studies many years ago on solar power satellites. Where's NASA talking about our energy problems today? Where do the you know, you guys are talking to the candidates. Do you think there's any hope that you can, you know, shift the, you know, this boat, you know, change its course, maybe to do some real redirection of the course of NASA? I guess that's my question.
Laurie?
Well, we're all about hope, Ron, so we think there's hope for sure. Those are the kinds of things we've talked about in the campaign. I hope you'll be hearing more in the election, but if not, certainly in an Obama administration. Those are great questions. Innovation is what NASA should be about. We should be investing in more of those advanced technologies. We should be giving back to the American public, doing those things like investing in alternative energy that NASA could play a role in. That is precisely the kind of thing that an Obama administration would be interested in doing.
I have a question for you, Laurie. Will Mr. Obama keep funding programs such as, you know, Teacher in Space, as opposed to Buck Rogers and getting out there? I had a column a couple months ago which I called it Teacher in Space or Buck Rogers. One of them pushes the boundaries and gets everybody excited and wants to do things, and the other one makes everybody feel good maybe for a little while. Are they going to keep doing that?
You know, that is not something that we have talked about. How about Senator McCain? Have you talked to him about that, Walt?
I don't talk to the Senate.
All right.
He calls me.
Over here, okay.
Walt, 30 years, and 6 months ago I read The All-American Boys on a cold winter night. It was so good I couldn't put it down. I've never forgotten it in 3 decades. And I remember in that book how skeptical you were of the shuttle program. Now, my question is for both of you. Elon Musk down there in Hawthorne, California, is developing something called the Dragon, 6-passenger capsule. he says we'll be ready to fly by 2011. I'm not saying buy it or use that as the interim, but has anybody really given it some serious consideration?
Couple points. Thank you for your comments about the All-American Boys. The most recent copy is an audio book, much upgraded, much updated.
Okay.
You will enjoy it.
Okay.
Secondly, I was skeptical about the shuttle program, not because of the technology, but because at the time, the emphasis inside of NASA, especially at the Johnson Space Center, was de-emphasizing the influence of the astronauts on the design stage. I lived through the design of the Apollo Command Module. Basically, I lived in Downey, California, while it was being birthed. And in those days, if anything, astronauts had too much say-so. But as the end user, the engineers paid attention to us. Along came the period of time, and this is how it runs cyclically, whether the astronaut influence is high or low. And that was a period of time when they didn't want astronauts working on their program because it slowed them down. Yes, it did, and it made it better. But we got by that. You may also recall from that edition of the book that I said it was going to be at least 2 years later than NASA said, which was right.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, how about the Dragon?
Elon Musk, more power to the guy, but there's a reason why manned spaceflight is so expensive. And it takes a whole lot more in terms of capability, redundancy, and things like that than any of the civilian rocket developers are doing today. One of the problems that we got into when NASA joined up and went to Mir, and there's a reason why NASA has had what I consider an exceptional safety record over their entire lifetime. Well, when they went to Mir, we had a lot of troubles on Mir. That's why I consider it so dangerous. But one of the things they did, instead of sticking to their usual approach on failure mode and effects analysis and just call it credibility for safety, they decided, because they had to hustle this program along, to accept the Russian record up until then as presented to us by the Russians. Surprise, it wasn't very complete. It wasn't very up to date. And consequently, we went into that program without having done our usual safety analysis, and that's why they had fires on board. They had one astronaut spent most of his time mopping up the moisture behind the electronics. It was a nightmare from a space perspective. So I'm saying that is going to have to be gone through if we ever end up using something like Elon Musk's machine in the future. And I don't think that those contractors are really ready to face all that's entailed in building a safe manned spacecraft.
Laura, too.
As I mentioned, commercial space and things like COTS are the kind of things that Senator Obama would definitely support for NASA. I think it's a reasonable approach. It does buy down the risk, and we had similar programs over the last 15 years when I was there. Now, I'm as hopeful for SpaceX and Elon Musk, but I was for Kistler and Beale and Rotary and Kelly, and I remember them all. And I guess I hope that we're getting closer. And I think we are. I think that we have a program that's obviously more robust than it had been. Dragon in particular, I know there's been a lot of work on it, and I'm hopeful that one of those approaches can help with the gap. That's clearly the plan to get us there, while Orion's primarily for the lunar mission, and that's why it's a more expensive and more detailed program. So those are the kinds of things that we support, and I think the government does have a role in investing in those technologies and buying down the risk.
Thank you. Okay, I'm getting nervous. We got a bunch of people, and I don't know how we're doing on time, and we're going to have to cut it off here. And maybe take just a few more, and then we'll cut it. Phil Smith, yeah.
Hi, Leonard. May I have permission to ask two brief questions?
Two brief questions.
I promise.
Okay, are they brief?
This one's for Lori. As taxpayers, we've indirectly contributed to the development and deployment of the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle. I feel we should use this investment in lieu of the REs. Will Obama consider this, especially in light of the closing of the gap?
Well, one of the things you've noticed is Senator Obama has talked about constellation and has not really specified the specific architecture. And I think one of the reasons for that is that until you have the office, until you're there and you know what's going on with these programs, you're not going to make a commitment to it. So I think an Obama administration would look at the existing major programs, of which this is one, and see that it was proceeding technically on budget and so forth and was the best approach. And so in answer to your question, I would say yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cunningham, I have a brief question. Obama has been on the record saying he will not in any way support space weapons. Senator McCain has not presented a position on this matter. Do you have a clue as to what he would perhaps have a stand on in that regard?
Are you referring to any specific space weapons?
Well, therein lies the rub. The point is, he has gone on record saying, in principle, he will not support it. So
I'm
it is a difficult
familiar
question.
with his statement. I also have an opinion on how much space history he's got in him. For example, does he know that the Russians flew the Almaz spacecraft back in early 1980s, had a cannon on board it, a few things like that? I mean, there's been weapons in space for a long, long time. And I don't believe, at least I'm not aware of any that we have had, but there is no question that space is a high frontier, and whether we like it or not, it's going to have to be defended. There's probably no other country in the world that's more dependent on their space assets than the United States. And I can only tell you that I hope that there's people out there in the black programs doing what they have to do to defend our assets in space. And you know something? Personally, if it comes down to have to shoot one of them to save ours, I'm in favor of it.
Okay, I think you definitely answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, Laura, you don't have nothing that we want to go over here? Okay?
Okay, I've heard a couple of phrases tonight that will carry me through for days. One of them was the term risk-aversive as something that NASA is plagued with. The next thing that I've heard is that Senator McCain will hold NASA's feet to the fire. Now, if that's not going to make them even more risk-aversive, I don't know what will. Do you?
Well, for example, when I say feet to the fire, I don't know how many here are aware of the NASA budget every year and how much it includes in terms of earmarks, pork projects, and the like, that NASA doesn't really have a say over how that money gets spent. The worst year is like fiscal year 06. It was almost $600 million. And if there's one thing I have confidence in, I have confidence in John McCain's complete antipathy for anything like earmarks and pork barrel spending. So I feel things like that will get addressed. And incidentally, I don't see anything wrong with holding everybody accountable for the way money is spent. I believe all programs ought to be done responsibly.
Okay, maybe just one more here, and I'm sorry, maybe you can get to the people and ask them direct.
You bet. You had threw out a couple of numbers here: $2 billion a year to keep the shuttle mission going, $5 billion to keep the constellation going. These are interesting because $2 billion is approximately 1 week of Iraq. $5 billion is approximately 2 weeks of Iraq. Which one of these candidates is going to hold the feet to the fire of the military-industrial complex so that we don't keep wasting all this kind of money instead of going to Mars and increasing our human presence in space? Thank you.
Okay, Lori, take that one.
Well, Senator Obama's been clear about the ongoing war in Iraq and to get us out of Iraq and stop spending that $2 billion a week. I think that is one of probably the most decisive positions that the two candidates differ on.
Walt, anything there? Anything you want to say here, and just a short closing statement, and get us out to vote, and whatever.
Sure. I would say that the bottom line is that Senator Obama really does recognize the importance of the nation's space program. I've personally talked to him about it several times, including recently. He sees it as a position that we need to be of global leadership, and it gives the U.S. a scientific and economic and national security edge. We need to work with our international partners and the private sector better, and to have an agenda that is based on science. We haven't talked about this in the debate, but it's been obviously a problem with the existing administration's war on science at NASA and other public agencies. Senator Obama has a respect for our community and our achievements to date, and I look forward to having him as a Commander-in-Chief to carry us onward back to the moon and on to Mars. Thank you.
Walt?
Well, I don't really have a lot to say except to say that it doesn't really boil down to what they say. It boils down to what they mean, what they believe in, and what kind of commitment they put behind it. And you're entitled to draw your own conclusions. I, for one, am unconvinced that there's any kind of commitment for a space program by a candidate who has started off by trying to take $5 billion out of the Constellation program, for example. I mean, that's not delaying the Constellation program. That was just a way of ending the Constellation program. And that doesn't show a whole lot of foresight and vision and commitment. I think that you have to have spent a lot of time in your life dealing with these kind of issues to have the kind of commitment that I know you have. Certainly I know that I have. Thank you.
Let's thank our presenters, Laurie Garver and Walt Cunningham, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Laurie. Got my feet.